to you.
Thank you, Tamsin, and welcome everybody. Really good to see you all at this important event. From the faculty's perspective, it is crucial, I think, that we support impact however we can, in the best ways we can. Impact is something I think we've done pretty well with in this faculty. Is making impact a priority, I think quite rightly, in advance of the next ref, and also in terms of improving our research across the board. I think there's some excellent expertise, on this call as it happens, but certainly in this faculty in relation to arts and humanities. So it's important to note that we're starting from a strong platform here. What we want to do with this impact acceleration account is set up a designated unit which can generate ideas, can support existing impact along the lines of the ESRC Impact Accelerator account, which we're part of and have been for a couple of years now, and that Tamsin and Rachel run very effectively. So we have the expertise within the faculty to actually develop this arts and humanities component. I think the reason for support is probably obvious to many of us involved in research, but just important to spell it out. I think that the impact is different from other kinds of research, I think, in terms of time scale. It's not as clearly defined in terms of time as other kinds of research output, and it's dependent upon other research rather than necessarily being impact, being research in itself. In other words, and it's not quite public engagement, it needs to run alongside existing research. So impact requires a different level, a different sense of time in relation to planning, to resources, in terms of gathering info. And I think with the arts and humanities in particular, there are very particular kinds of impact that lend itself to the research that we do in these particular areas, and that's why it's different from, say, the ESRC type topics, and that's why a dedicated arts and humanities impact accelerator account is really important. And I think there are two things really. It's important that we sustain the good work that we've done in impact in terms of specific case studies, but also good practice. So we want to sustain that, and this is a good way of doing that. But also we want to try and generate more impact as we go through the next research cycle. And this is where I think this kind of structure becomes crucially important. Impact is only going to become more important, I think, more formalised in terms of research councils and in terms of REF, and this should put us in the best position to make the most of what we have. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more from everyone on this call, including questions and answers. So I'm going to pass on now to Rachel.
Thank you very much, Bran. So just really wanted to welcome you in my role as Associate Dean for Research and Innovation for the faculty. So thank you very much for coming along today and showing your interest in the Arts and Humanities IAA. As Bran said, we're really hoping that this IAA will be as successful as the ESRC one. The ESRC one has provided a really useful, I think, blueprint for what we're proposing today, in the sense that as well as kind of individual projects that we'll be funding, we're also hoping to do quite a lot of capacity building and training so that we can support that part of the faculty that hasn't been able to take so much advantage of the ESRC funds. And I suppose I just wanted to kind of locate what we're doing within the kinds of strategy of the faculty and the university. So as hopefully you're aware, the university has a focus on scaling innovation in its currently refreshed strategy. And innovation here, the university understands that as the process going from knowledge exchange, from research that has been conducted, through to achieving impact and supporting that whole kind of journey. And so the Arts and Humanities IAA is definitely kind of supporting that university aim of scaling our innovation work. But I also wanted to mention the faculty research and innovation strategy. I've put the link to that in the chat, which is available on the Frio SharePoint site. And if you look at that strategy, one of the objectives that we've set for ourselves over the next few years is to extend our innovation activity to support REF and REF impact case studies that, as Bran mentioned, we did pretty well at last time, but much more broadly than that, to make sure that we really maximise the socioeconomic impact of the research that we're doing here at Surrey. And so strategically, strategically, the Arts and Humanities IAA is very important for us in helping us to achieve those broader objectives around strengthening innovation in the faculty. I'm not going to say much more at this point because I guess you're much more interested in the detail that Tamsin is going on to give, but I would just like to make to thank a few people at this point. I think firstly, thank you to the university for the financial investment in this. The money for the Arts and Humanities IAA is coming from our HIFE funds, that's the Higher Education Innovation Funds. A large amount comes to the university, and then the university has made quite a considerable sum available to us to run this programme. So thank you for the support from the Central University teams. And also a big thank you to Tamsin, who's agreed to take on managing the Arts and Humanities IAA, in addition to her work on the ESLC side of things. So really grateful to her. And then also to our two co-directors who've agreed to take on those leadership roles, Patricia from Literature and Languages and Melissa from Law. And you'll hear a bit more from them later on, but we're very grateful to them for stepping into those important leadership roles. So, and finally, thank you to everybody for coming along today. I hope you find it useful, and I'll look forward to hopefully working with many of you on specific IA projects in the future. So thank you very much, and over to Tamsin now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel. Okay, so kicking off with some context. So as Rachel has said, the university has allocated about £200,000 per annum of HIFE funding to each faculty, and faculties have been able to choose how they wanted to allocate this and what they would use it for. In FAS, we're really lucky that Rachel and Bran and others have decided that we should use £150,000 per annum of this to create this Arts and Humanities IAA. And the intention there is to support impact generation at all stages from Surrey Arts and Humanities research. It's a significant amount of support, and support the like of which we haven't had before. So I think it's a really fantastic opportunity. Part of what we're hoping to do with this is also to build capacity ahead of our next application for AHRC IAA funding, which we expect to be in 2024. We did put an application in for the last round, and unfortunately we weren't successful. It was very competitive, and we're hoping that this allows us to make big strides in terms of demonstrating the impact from our arts and humanities research, which will put us in a better place to be successful in the next round. The purpose of the Arts and Humanities IAA is very similar to that of the ESLC IAA. We're looking to fund impact generation from Surrey Arts and Humanities research. We're looking to contribute to capacity building and skills development, particularly around impact and knowledge exchange and innovation within the institution for the arts and humanities. And we're also looking to capture evidence and build visibility of arts and humanities research and impact, both internally and externally. And I think that's been one of the big successes of the ESLC IAA for the social sciences. And we're really keen to draw on learnings from that and have the same impact for arts and humanities research. So the key question is, what will the funding cover? So we've allocated about £100,000 per annum just for project funding. So that will be available to for people to apply to fund an impact project. We've then made about £15,000 available for capacity building and skills development activities, so running training workshops around impact generation for the arts and humanities, and we've got about £8,000 set aside for public engagement activities. With the ESLC IAA, we support activity around the ESLC's Festival of Social Science. There's obviously an equivalent for AHRC, the Being Human Festival, which happens around the same time. So we're looking at whether we combine those two together and support them simultaneously. There will also be some dedicated admin support. We're looking to recruit an Arts and Humanities IAA project officer role, so doing the equivalent position as Emma does for the ESLC IAA with a 0.5 FTE. So some of the kind of terms and conditions up front before we get into the exciting bit. as the funding for this Arts and Humanities IA comes from HIFE, we have to comply with HIFE requirements as to how we spend the money and how we report on the activity. This isn't a million miles away from the restrictions that we have with the ESRC IA, where we also have to comply with ESRC requirements, and we have to report back to them on how we've spent the money and what it's contributed to. But it's worth making clear up front, I think, that this isn't a kind of impact slush fund, so to speak. We're looking to track the impact of the activity that we fund and to work with people on an ongoing and longer term basis to help them keep generating impact and be able to capture the evidence of that. The two key eligibility criteria for people to be aware of is we can't fund primary research. Now, obviously, there's some grey areas around that. You can end up with methodologies that might be research methodologies that are occurring within an impact generation project. So, for example, some sampling or piloting or scoping activity at the beginning of the project that might be gathering a baseline against which you could measure impact that has happened at the end of the project. But I think the key point is that the primary budget and the primary focus of the project should be on the impact generation and not on the research. My general rule of thumb advice to people, if they're coming with early stage ideas about projects, is if you start off by saying to me, we want to answer the question X, it's probably a research project. And if you start off by saying we want to create impact Y, then we're more solidly on the impact scale of things. But this is the sort of thing that can be discussed when people are coming and indicating that they're interested to apply. I think the other important point to emphasise there is that the key aim here is about delivering benefit to society and not to academics. The other thing that is different for this IA to the ESRC IA is that HIFE funding is linked to the university's financial year. So that means funding allocated in each financial year will need to be spent by the end of that year, or we need to know upfront that it's going to, that the duration will run across financial years, and then we'll have to part allocate from the different year allocations. So that will be slightly more complex than it is for the ESRC IA where we have the ability to roll over to subsequent years. But I think I think everyone is used to, with the faculty seed funding, for example, used to having to complete spend by the end of July. So hopefully that won't be too much of a shock. So, project funding stream, I'm starting there because I'm assuming that's going to be the one that will be of most interest to everybody. We're basically drawing a lot of the framework from what we've learned through an extensive and steep learning curve of trial and error on the ESRC IA, what we've learned to be frameworks that work really well. So applications are supported through a facilitated development process. What that means in practice is you can come and talk about your initial idea and get some feedback on whether it's going to be a good fit for the IA. I can provide feedback on applications as they're in development, and then we do a lot of support for people delivering IA projects. One of the things we found is that impact projects, unlike research projects, have a tendency to vary wildly once they start. So, you can have a firm idea of what's going to happen, and then you're engaging with people who are outside of the university. And that can mean that there's often a lot of flux or changes that need to be absorbed or responded to. So we found that support from the IA team on how best to manage that has really helped in terms of the impact outcomes of projects. Similarly, we are running it as a permanently open rolling call, but do be aware of the HIFE spend deadlines. So, for example, thinking about how long you have until the July cut-off point and whether you need to ask for funding across 2 financial years or within 1 financial year. In terms of eligibility for IA project funding, the PI, the lead investigator for the project, needs to be an Arts and Humanities academic member of staff, but non-academic members of staff, either teaching staff or professional services, can be named as co-Is. The one caveat I would say there is, if you're collaborating with somebody who is not an academic member of staff and their full FTE is spent on work for the university which doesn't include research activity, then it needs to be really clear how their time is going to come to this project without cannibalizing the time that the university is paying them for the job that they're doing. So it's not impossible, and we are keen to be inclusive, but that's, you know, that's just one aspect that needs to be made clear in that application. We also encourage people to include ECR and PGR researchers in their projects, so for example as research assistants or as named researchers within the research team. In the ESRC IA, we've seen a couple of projects where the impact generation project was led by a team including a supervisor and a PGR who was looking to create impact from their PhD project, and some of those have been incredibly successful, so that's something else to think about. In terms of what the money can be spent on, we prioritise funding going to the direct costs of the project. So as a result, we don't usually fund academic staff time, partly because it would very quickly eat up the available funding that we have if we did that. But we can fund any of the direct costs that are related to being able to have the impact project happen. So that can be RA time, research assistant time, we can pay for the time of external non-academic partners, and we can pay for travel, venues. We can't fund capital costs or any equipment costs over 10,000. But I mean, that we haven't seen any requests for those on the ESRC IA, so I'm not expecting that to be different on the Arts and Humanities IA. The other thing to mention is we have to be careful that we're not duplicating other funding. So if you're currently working on a research project which has an impact pathway as part of it, and you come to us and ask for funding for doing impact activity which relates to that project, we're going to have to make sure that the impact activity you want the IA to fund is not double funding impact which could have been covered or should have been covered or is covered under the actual research project funding. But if you've completed a funded research project or an unfunded period of research activity, we can fund the impact generation that comes subsequent to that. So we have 3 streams of project funding that each match different stages that people might be at in terms of the impact activity they want to carry out. So the impact generation fund is usually, so on the ESRC IA, we've usually seen durations of around 12 months. The budget is up to 15,000, and these are projects that are carrying out impact activities and delivering societal change within the project, whether that's at early stages or a more complete way. We then have an impact exploration fund. So usually these are slightly shorter projects, budget of up to 5k, and these are projects that are exploring possibilities, perhaps of future impact collaborations with stakeholders, or trying to understand what the best ways forward would be to deliver impact from their research. And then finally, we have a rapid response fund of stream of funding, which is usually a month or 2 months with a budget of up to 2,000 and has a very quick responsive turnaround. I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about each of those streams. So rapid response funding, the purpose of this stream is so that we can be responsive to time sensitive and or urgent requests for small amounts of funding to support impact or knowledge exchange activity. The application for this stream has a fast track process, which basically involves just submitting a 1-page outline of the proposed activity, how this contributes to an impact or knowledge exchange agenda, and a brief outline of the costs requested. And then we review the application by the IAA exec team. So it doesn't have to wait for the project management board meetings, which are every other month. And we then, once that's reviewed, we can then respond to that and get everything set up really quickly. So it's the one to go for if you're looking for a really quick turnaround, or there's time sensitivity about what you want to do. Rapid response funding can lead into other impact funding, either within the IAA. So for example, sometimes people come back and then apply for an impact generation project subsequently, or other internal innovation funds, or even external funding. So we've had some examples so far that have included pilot or scoping activity with a non-academic partner, or support, for example, travel or other direct costs to engage with actual or potential research users. So, for example, people have been invited to give evidence to policymakers either nationally or internationally, and it can support the travel to do that. The Impact Exploration Fund is for applicants who need support to develop and ideally to co-create their impact plans with the stakeholders. So sometimes that's for people who haven't yet identified who they want to work with. They don't have an academic partner lined up. They're not clear who their research user or stakeholder community would be that they want to work with, but they have a sense that their research fundings have the potential to deliver impact. So we have an IAA application form, which we have sometimes had feedback is slightly long-winded, but the purpose of the questions on it are to walk you through the sorts of questions that are beneficial for you to be asking yourself as you're planning your impact project. And we can provide support with that in terms of the pre-application discussion and then feedback on the application drafts. When both sides feel the application's ready, we then submit them and they get reviewed at the Impact Acceleration Account Project Management Board, which meets every other month. So the impact exploration stream might be for you if you have research findings that you think have impact potential, but you're not sure where to start, and you need some funding that will help you explore the possibilities. If you need help to identify a non-academic partner or connection to research user or stakeholder groups, and you need some funding to help attract people in to start those conversations. If you're not sure what activities would best deliver impact with your stakeholder beneficiary group, so perhaps you know who you want to work with, you've got a partner lined up, but you need some funding that will give you time to work together with those partners, with your stakeholders, to think about what is the most effective impact activities that we can undertake to create the impact outcomes that we're looking to create. And I think the other big advantage of this stream of funding is it really gives you a bit more freedom to explore and test. The aim of this funding is about exploration and trial, rather than having a clearer idea of what impact outcomes you're going to deliver, and then perhaps that's slightly less free in terms of the process of delivering the funding. And finally, we have the Impact Generation Fund, which offers up to 15,000. And one thing I would say here is we don't expect you to put in applications that are up to the upper limit. So the board will be looking at value for money in the applications. And so, think very carefully about the cost that you need to deliver the activity that you're wanting to carry out within the impact project. And tailor your costs around that, rather than thinking it says up to 15k, I'm going to put something in for £14,999. So the Impact Generation Fund is for applicants that already have a fairly developed idea of what impact they intend to create and how they want to achieve it. So they usually have non-academic partners lined up, or a good connection into the stakeholder or research user groups that they want to work with, and either they already have, or we help them kind of work through a fairly coherent and perhaps more detailed sense of what impact outputs and outcomes they expect to see from this activity. Again, the application process is the same as for the Impact Exploration Fund, but we're usually expecting a slightly more detailed level of content in that application form, because it's a larger amount of money that's being requested. So the impact generation stream is for people who already have a fairly clear idea of what impact activities they want to carry out and the beneficial outcomes or impacts that will result for the stakeholders, and who already have non-academic partner or partners lined up and good connections into their research user or stakeholder groups. So what are we looking for in successful projects? And I will say here, this slide in particular is drawn on the ESRC IAA activity. We don't yet have successful projects for the Arts and Humanities IAA, and I think one of the things I want to say up front is that we are looking for this to be informed by the Arts and Humanities research community. So we've set this up drawing heavily on the ESRC IA model, but we're open to, or we have expectations that there may be elements in which Arts and Humanities need different kinds of support, and that there may be, as we go through, we're looking for input from you to help us tailor this to be the most successful and the most benefit for you. So the first point here is they need to draw on Surrey research findings. So if people are looking to create impact from activity that isn't research linked, or to create impact from research that didn't happen at Surrey, that's more challenging for us to support. We're looking for impact projects that are challenge led, that are looking at solving societal challenges in particular. We're also looking for projects that are stakeholder informed, so that are really collaborative, that are co-created, that are inclusive. We've done a lot of work recently thinking about our EDI approach within the structure and the governance of the IA on the ESRC IA side, and we're keen to extend that into the Arts and Humanities IA side as well. So that might mean thinking through, you know, is your stakeholder or your research user community that you're planning to engage with, is that diverse? You know, are you pushing yourself to make sure that you're being inclusive across different aspects of measures within that? We're looking ideally for projects that are going to be impactful, that are going to lead to a measurable change as a result of the activities that we're funding. Now, we also recognise, as Bran very rightly said at the start, that impact takes time to develop. So we're not expecting, you know, complete and mature impact at the end of the IA project, but we're looking for something to have changed. And then the other thing that the board often assess when they're looking at IA applications is the activity timely and significant? You know, why is this impact needed now? We are able to support projects that are multidisciplinary. So you can collaborate with people from the social sciences or from any of the other disciplines, or with people that are not at Surrey, although we can't then fund time for academics at other institutions, but you can certainly involve them in your IA project. One of the big benefits of IA funding is it's able to support activity that is innovative and high risk. It doesn't require the same expectations as perhaps research funding can do sometimes. There's more freedom to try things that we're not certain are going to work, but that would have a significant benefit if they did work. And I've mentioned about collaborating in terms of being collaborative within the institution, but also outside the institution and with non-academic partners. So this is just a kind of summary of what we've covered already. So in terms of applying for the IA project funding, most people start off with an initial chat about eligibility with myself as the IA manager. It gives a chance to check that it's going to fit with the remit of the IAA. Often people then ask for feedback on the application drafts, and then completed applications are submitted to the FAST IAA Project Management Board, which meets every other month. And then we've talked a bit before about the eligibility criteria, but just another reminder, projects have to be impact, not research. And for this stream of funding, again, in line with the ESRC IA, which has an eligibility criteria of at least 51% social science, we are, in order to focus this funding towards the arts and humanities, we're expecting projects will be a majority, however slight, of arts and humanities focus. We're also planning to, as I mentioned before, we've got a public engagement and a capacity building and skills development stream within this IA funding. This will enable us both to part fund activity that's already happening within the ESRC IAA to open that up to arts and humanities researchers. But we're also very open to setting up funding for arts and humanities specific impact and public engagement skills. And if there is training in any particular area or a particular training provider that you think would be really interesting, do let us know. We're very keen to, co-create this with the community. So we will come up with our own ideas, but if you think there are particular places that we should look or particular aspects that would be helpful to cover, do tell us and we can build that into our training. The IAA team also offer impact related training. So we've done a couple of different Impact Away Day presentations where we've worked through a worksheet to help people think about where impact might come from their research. And we also do presentations about the IAA at events or inductions or staff meetings if you think that would be helpful in your school or department. We're also looking at facilitating training around business and commercialization skills. Now, this is something we've just recently started to add in on the ESRC IA side, and I think it's been a really interesting learning curve. And I'm anticipating that perhaps some colleagues on the arts and humanities side might feel like the social scientists did when we first started having those conversations, which is that, what does commercialization have to do with us? But I think we've learned a lot about the opportunities there, particularly around sustainable revenue for research and impact activity. And I think we're really keen to look at how we can build that into the arts and humanities side, working closely with the innovation teams, including those in tech transfer and the other innovation strategy teams to support that. We're also planning to continue to run public engagement events, and we're looking at perhaps having a focus specifically around the AHRC's Being Human Festival, or if there are other public engagement festival opportunities that you feel are particularly of relevance for the arts and humanities. Again, do let us know and we can build that into what we're planning. So we're coming to the end of the kind of detail bit. We've got a couple of speakers coming up who I think will be really interesting for you. We will be developing some Arts and Humanities IAA web pages. So those will take a little bit of time to get set up. We will, oh, excuse me, I pressed too soon. We will be having an Arts and Humanities project officer, but in the meantime, if you're interested, you want to learn more about the project funding, or you have an idea and you want to get more input, do email me and we can have a chat. So we've now got a presentation. It's a video because Melissa unfortunately is in the States, and so time zones meant that she wasn't able to join us live. So we have a video from her talking about the benefits of the IAA and her experience of accessing ESRC IAA funding. And then after that, Patricia Pulham is going to talk about her experience of supporting impact for REF. So I'm going to play this. Hopefully you're all going to be able to hear it. If not, can somebody yell? Okay, fingers crossed.
Hello, I'm Melissa Hamilton. I'm in the law school here at Surrey. The law straddles both the social sciences and the humanities. So I've been able to access IA funds from the ESRC bucket for social science. From that, then I'm able to relate to you how the internal IA process within FAST works, and also to confirm the multiple benefits that access to this type of funding stream can have in propelling impact. So herein, I want to give a few important points to hopefully motivate you to thinking about how these funds can work for you. But before I begin, a critical piece of information can help contextualize this opportunity. The university really wants to expend these monies to benefit your research impact activities. So think of it not as much in the competitive mode of the external funding sources, but instead with the idea that the university actually desires to assist you in reaching your intended audiences. A couple of reasons then that I found that there are benefits strategically to using the internal acceleration funds rather than just in external sources. So one, as I have found it a much more transparent process in terms of who is making the decision, what are the bases of their decision, than external funding. So you generally kind of know where you're at. Much quicker time frame for approvals. So depending on when the next board is going to meet, generally you'll know something within months at the most, if not just weeks, but certainly not the many months or years that you face when you're trying to get external funds. You will get assistance in completing forms in terms of, for example, how to express your project in ways that can make it fundable, as well as be more successful in terms of what the funds are intended to achieve. And in that mode of more transparency, quicker time process, and assistance, is there really is a feeling that there is a team behind you. Tamsin and her team works really hard. It feels much more that they're on your side than other kinds of funding sources, and I believe that they are. So it can be a really beneficial process, not only to get the funds, but it helps you articulate your project in ways that others can understand, and they also will help you strategize how best to use the funds, how best to exploit the abilities that the funds, or the doors that the funds will help open in terms of you having more impact with your research. The funds offer really significant flexibility in how to spend them. One of the things I know I get often from my colleagues is when I'm talking to them about using impact funds, is they kind of don't know where to start about thinking of to use funds for what. And one of the reasons is because there isn't a limited, set of things or items that can be funded with this. So just kind of think broadly, but I can give you some examples of at least ways that I've spent it or can conceive of that may at least start you out on the process of thinking of it. So many different options here. For example, you can pay for assistance. This is going to be from students, undergraduate students or graduate students, but it's not limited to that. It could be using funds to hire external experts, those that want to work with you, but for whatever reasons, they have constraints where they might not be able to do so for free. If you can get external experts, and I have found that this is often true, is they may reduce their fee because they do want to work with you. They just simply can't do it pro bono. Or other types of consultants you may be able to hire to assist you. You can hold stakeholder or other public events that will then extend your impact and your reach. You can use it to hire technical expertise. This could be for things such as video production, website design, creating an interactive module, or maybe simply a flyer or glossy cards that you can hand out that spreads your research and your impact to the people who matter to your project. Funds for travel, where your regular funds that you might normally get may not extend that far, such as international events. And then just other types of collaborations to think of. It could be, for example, a series of small team meetings in different cities or forums. So kind of the general idea is think broadly, think creatively in terms of how to convey your message to your stakeholders and or public audiences, and how this funding then may assist you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Melissa. Okay, and now I am going to hand over to Patricia. Patricia, do you want to let me know when you're ready for me to move the slides on, and I'll move them on?
Yes, I'm ready. I think we can go to the next one. I just wanted to really talk to you about the REF cycle, I suppose, in terms of impact and my own experience of that, because I think it's a wonderful resource to have the Impact Acceleration Fund available to us. But sometimes it's, especially if you're a bit inexperienced, you're not quite sure what you want to do or how to do it. So I thought that it might be good just to kind of give you my a brief kind of overview really of my experience, both as an impact case study writer and as a director of research and coordinator for the REF in terms of developing impact and supporting impact across various impact case studies. I was Director of Research and Coordinator for the English Language and Literature UOA, both at a previous institution in REF 2014 and here at Surrey for REF 2021. And I also wrote an impact case study for the REF 2014 one, which was Victorian Literary Heritage. And I think we were the guinea pig year where we had no real idea of what was required. And the biggest mistake I think we made was that not quite understand that public engagement in itself wasn't enough, and a few surveys at the end of some public events was not enough, that impact had to be proved in a more kind of meaningful way. But I did okay with that one. But what I did was I used my experience of that to analyse impact case studies that were then submitted in that UOA in REF 2014 to try to develop a strategy for REF 2021. So we can go to the next slide, please, Tamsin.
Okay.
And this, I'm not suggesting that you all do this individually. I think it's good if perhaps your directors of research do this, and it may be that you're doing this already, but I found this absolutely invaluable to do this. It gave me a real sense of how people were developing impact and what was possible actually even in areas that I thought were less likely to have impact. So I did engage in an analysis of 66 impact case studies. I focused on ones that had 100% 4-star impact, or a combination that was quite high, between 90 and 100% mix of 4 and 3-star, or 100% 3-star, just to kind of see what the spread was. And I did come across a number of sort of world leading factors that seemed to be very common across the board. So things like globally recognised stakeholders, you know, projects with global application potential for educational, therapeutic purposes, of working with disadvantaged groups, for example. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all go out and find a disadvantaged group just to have impact, but what I'm saying is that if your work can be engaged in some meaningful way and actually be of service to some disadvantaged groups, and I think it's a really worthwhile and also incredibly rewarding process, as some of our impact case studies writers found this time round. And some, you know, ICS has developed from externally funded projects seem to do well, but I think that sometimes, you know, we get an externally funded project, and you know, sometimes you have to apply for follow-up funding, but sometimes you could develop some impact from that by, for example, using some funding from the IAA resource. So it's worth kind of thinking about how you might do that. And then also national international prizes also seem to play a part in that. Now, it may be different this time around, so it's worth that's why I think the analysis is a really good starting point for what you might do next. So we could go to the next slide, please, Tamsin. So I think that, again, it's good to look at, you know, how your research might have impact. But one of the things I learned as an impact case study writer was that sometimes what you think might be impactful is not what your stakeholder thinks might be impactful. So I think it's incredibly important that if you identify some stakeholders, that you work with them and co-develop the impact. I mean, what do they want to achieve? You know, what from your research, you know, rather than what can you gift them, what do they want to get from you, and how can you help them achieve it, and also how are you going to evidence it? And the one big thing I would say is gather evidence along the way. Don't do it retrospectively because it's incredibly difficult. And so I think that's something to really think about carefully if you're planning to set up some collaborations, because it's actually really helpful to have them tell you what they might want to achieve. But I think also one big thing to be aware of is that they work sometimes at different timelines to institutions, to higher education institutions, and sometimes, you know, they work to shorter time frames, sometimes they work to longer time frames. So what Bram was saying about the kind of process of impact development is something that perhaps you need to take into account in terms of the overall timeline. And then when you start to develop your impact case narrative, which of course, you know, you won't have to do just yet, but it's just as well to sort of think about as the impact develops, you know, to start making sort of bullet point notes about how this might be working, and in that sense, you know, it's quite useful to think about your own criteria within the impact criteria. You know, how could you explain how the researchers have been involved in and met those criteria, and also to think from the stakeholders' perspective. And that's where, if you are working with stakeholders, it's quite good to get their perspective on the kind of narrative you're developing, because there will be stakeholders on the REF panels in due course. So it's good to have their input, not just on the development of the impact, but also if they're able to see how you're actually developing the impact case study. You can build on existing research profiles and strengths. I mean, some ICSs weren't underpinned by just recent research, but by much more long-standing research. Even though some were also built from recent research. Sometimes things accelerate at an incredibly fast pace, and we had one of those particularly in English literature and languages, which actually turned out to be a fantastic impact case study. And I think also to not forget, the potential impact of your project. So think about how you might elicit responses. And even though I'm hesitant to recommend Twitter at the moment given the new owner, but I think that idea of capturing retweets, comments, that kind of can help. You build your narrative. Can I have the next slide, please, Tamsin? And so this is where I think that you might draw again on the impact acceleration funds. I mean, here we've got, I know that training is planned, and I know that the FRIOs will be involved in that. But I also think that having some training on impact in your particular field is again really important, because it helps you see what's possible, and I know that our impact lead and director of research in English in SLL are already kind of working on an event to do this. You can ask those questions about how people made contacts, how they developed it, what the pitfalls were. It's really helpful to know those things. And also to draw on the knowledge of the impact case writers that we do have in impact case study writers that we do have in FAST. That it's really helpful to have a session where they explained how they developed it, what kinds of initiatives they engaged in to build that impact case study. And I think at later stages, and this is something obviously that will come with the broader faculty or university sort of research strategies, but I think using external assessors to help you select the best projects, that was invaluable for us. We had an ex-AHRC impact advisor who reviewed SLL's impact case studies at a couple of points in their development, and then to offer specialist advice, and that was just so helpful in terms of cutting out the unnecessary material, making sure that the really vital material was in the narrative. So that's something that perhaps we might bear in mind in the training as well, Tamsin.
Yeah, brilliant.
And then I think there's just one more slide, is that right? Oh no, I think that's it. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the slides. And here, there we go. So now I can see everyone's faces again, which is much better. Okay, so that completes the slides and the kind of information download portion of the event. Rachel, do you want to provide a kind of reflection, or we can just launch straight into taking people's questions?
I'm happy to move into questions, Tamsin. Okay.
Now, I understand that there's one that Diane, oh, hang on, I'm scrolling back. Okay. Diane, how about things like the Hail My Literary Festival and other literary cultural festivals? I think that's a really interesting suggestion, Diane. I think the question would be, what do you want to do at them? So I think it was Patricia who made a really interesting point about public engagement versus impact. And so that would be the point where I'd perhaps be slightly cautious, is public engagement can be a really important. So I guess the the question is which stream you're thinking of that for. So if you're thinking of that for the public engagement stream, then yes, I think that's a really interesting thing to add in. If you're thinking of it for the project stream, I guess I would be encouraging to think through what the impact aspects of that might be beyond just the engagement.
Yeah, sure. I was thinking about it when you were talking about being human, and I was thinking about other sort of events, sort of that we might want to,
No, that's a really helpful,
relation to that. Yeah,
perfect. Thank you. Okay, I'm scrolling down. Carl, I can see your hand. I'm going to work through the questions in the chat first and then come back to hands. But if people want to ask questions, do put your hands up and we'll work our way through. So Mona, can the IA fund be used for research impact of an already existing research grant and or as complementary impact fund for a new research grant applications? So in terms of an existing research grant, the point I made before about duplication applies here. So it's much more straightforward if you've completed the research grant, because obviously then there is no risk of duplication. In the ESRC IA, we have funded projects that were running at the same time as existing funding, but the board really interrogated the ways in which the IA funded activity was going to be different to what was already covered by the actual external funding. So I think it's more challenging, or rather you have to make your case more convincingly if you're looking at a current a research grant that's active now, but certainly IA funding can be used to develop impact from a research grant that has completed. New research grant applications is also really interesting. I think there's certainly a place for co-creation work with non-academic partners as part of the impact exploration stream that is looking at designing a more competitive UKRI research grant, the focus being on co-creating that with the non-academic partners, not on the academic benefit of getting the research grant funding. Does that answer your question, Mona? Yes, perfect, brilliant, thank you. Okay, I'm going to jump to Carl and then take Helen's question in the chat and then Stephen. Carl.
Thank you, Catherine. That was really fascinating. Is there scope then in any of the funds, perhaps in the Impact Exploration Fund, to get some money for sort of work that doesn't so much tie in with a particular current impact project, but almost lays the foundation for future impact projects? So one thing I've been putting feelers out in the last week or so is to try and find if we've got any sort of register of local and national stakeholders we've already worked with. Which sort of fits with your saying about, the Impact Exploration Fund would put people in touch with local stakeholders. So could we perhaps almost, it's not tied to a particular impact project now, but it's about laying the foundations for future impact projects. Could we put in for that?
I think I would definitely encourage you to put it in, and then I think so what we found with the ESRC IA was that the first 18 months were a steep learning curve as the board worked out what it was that should be funded, basically. And it's sort of a process you have to go through by receiving applications, and then the whole board kind of calibrates what feels strong, and everyone has different perspectives, and we'll be building on some existing strength because obviously a lot of the board have already been doing this for some time. I think what you're describing to me would be almost like a kind of strategic it's like laying the foundations of frameworks that would help impact happen. So I don't think there's any reason why we couldn't fund that. And I think it would be interesting to, I think it would probably need some thinking through of A, how would you accomplish it, and B, what would the benefits be, and how would we, how would people be able to use it? So I'd probably encourage you to think about the usability factor of it. But I can't think of any, Rachel will contradict me if I'm wrong, but I can't think of any reason why that couldn't be funded.
Right, okay, I'll keep developing that idea then, thank you.
No problem. Okay, Helen. Helen says, how about working with publishers? Can we assist them to publish books? Now, that's a really interesting question, Helen. And it might be one that I table to go away and kind of do a bit more digging and come back to. I think it might depend on the specific situation. I think So by analogy, in the ESRC IA, we do have people who are working with companies to help them develop a prototype or a project, a product, where the academics research input is contributing to a better product. And there are obviously, that has commercial implications and economic benefits for the company that you're working with. So that feels like there's some analogy there with working with publishers. I think we'd have to be careful that we weren't just funding publishers to do the normal, activity that publishing that they would normally do as part of the company, that there would need to be some element of an impact generation that is part of that, supporting them to publish books. But it's a really interesting question, and I think is something I'd, if you were wanting to take forward a project in that area, I'd probably have to do some digging around and perhaps ask some colleagues that in institutions that have AHRC IA funding and see whether that's the sort of thing that they've seen there. Patricia, do you want to come in on that? Do you have any thoughts? So not putting you on the spot, but just in case.
No, I mean, I think we need a bit more information about what, Helen, you mean by helping publishers publish books, because what shape does that take? Can you say a little bit more? Is Helen there?
Helen, are you able to respond?
Sorry, I am here. I'm just kind of turning on cameras and things. My camera doesn't seem to want to go on.
Well, we can hear you fine, so do.
Okay, here I am. Okay, yeah, so I guess, I'm reading a book at the moment called What Katie Did, which is an old children's book, which the University of East Anglia got a kind of group together to write an introduction, and I think it was student-led, the whole thing. So it's kind of it's very framed republication of an old book, basically. So I'm thinking kind of around that model, but obviously thinking about what's meant by change, social change, and issues like that. So it's kind of in that kind of context. So publishing books which have been published before, republishing them, finding a reason why it's worth republishing them, that sort of thing. So yeah, and then obviously thinking about the sort of primary research you obviously involved, which is not the thing, but there's a kind of, I'm sort of stuck in a circularity at the moment with some ideas where I'm told I need a community to make it relevant, but
yeah.
So I'm sort of trying to build a community and interest, and then also do the primary research at the same time. So yeah.
Well, I think Helen, you'd want to see the impact coming from your research. So, how would your research kind of contribute to that republication? And I think that, it would have to be very clear how that changed somebody's life or mind or ideas about something. So it's not just getting the book out there with a new introduction. It would be, what did that introduction, how was that introduction received by a particular community, and how did it change their thinking? So it's the change element that's really difficult to prove in those sorts of situations. But maybe that's something we can discuss when we have our sort of in-house research impact meeting.
No, I would agree, and I would just add to that. So I think the Impact Exploration Fund could certainly help you with activity to help you find and develop a community around impact that could come from your research. And that's something that we found in terms of having funding available means that you can hold events, and you can fund people to come and start having those processes of conversation. So that might be something to think about. The other thing was on the ESRC Celebrating Impact Prize a couple of years ago, they had somebody up for their ECR prize who had as part of their research produced, I don't know whether any of you are old enough to remember the Little Miss and Mr. Men books. And so she was a sociologist working on adult homelessness, but particularly in women, and was looking at the ways in which existing structures for supporting homeless people don't support women well. And she produced a Little Miss Homeless book, which is obviously based on the research, but was a kind of way of engaging people in the issues that had arisen from the research in this very kind of pictographic sense, and was then using that with the charity groups supporting homeless people that she was working with, and also with policymakers to build awareness. So I think that's a really great example where there's a really clear causal link between producing a text, but it was having a very specific impact goal with it, and it was becoming a tool to engage with practitioners and general public to build awareness and further conversations. So something along that model I think could absolutely be possible, but Patricia's absolutely right, it needs to have that link to your actual research. Okay, so I think then we've got Stephen and then Jonathan and Konstantin in the chat. Stephen.
Yeah, hi there. My question is specific to my own research, but I also hope it just has some resonance with other people's work, particularly thinking through the intersections between public engagement and impact. Because my research, we look at the potential positive impact of therapeutic narratives on quality of life and psychological well-being of people with dementia in Colombia and other places in Latin America. And what we have the potential to do is to present some of this research at the Hay Literary Festival, but the Hay Literary Festival in Colombia. It has an international edition. So it's obviously public engagement, but what we're going to do, this particular edition of the Literary Festival is focused on young people in marginalized areas around the city of Medellin. And so our pitch is about intergenerational communication. It's about using narratives as a form of communication. And the output from our presentation is we're hoping to kind of drive participants to our current website that therein has a toolkit to enable anyone really to use therapeutic narratives as a form of mental health and well-being, safeguarding tool. And also we'll add to that with this intergenerational communication stuff. I just wonder how, in an application to the IAA funding, I'd unpick public engagement and more tangible or concrete impact work.
So I think that sounds really interesting, and I think you don't need to unpick the public engagement. So it's fine if there are public engagement streams within the impact, the IA funded project. One of the really fascinating things about the ESRC IA side is over 3 years of supporting with very small amounts of funding public engagement events delivered through the Festival of Social Science. We've seen a really disproportionate return on the subsequent impact of people carrying out those public engagement events. So they run a very small event which might have kind of 50 to 100 people attend, but a lot of those have then sparked new directions in research. They've sparked further IA projects because the stakeholders have got in touch with them and said, oh, we're really interested in this, can we take it further? They've sparked external funding grants. So public engagement is a really important pathway in terms of delivering impact, and it absolutely wouldn't be necessary to separate that out from an IA application. I think the key thing would be to really think about how could IA funding enable you to level up on the impact that you can achieve from the toolkit and the material that you have that's already existing. So rather than, I think there's an opportunity, rather than just doing the literary festival and then pointing people back, you might want to think about how can you kind of lead them through a trajectory of engagement that is thinking about wider scope and significance of the impact, and what would you like to achieve? Is it policy change? Is it greater awareness? Is it a particular particular act, like to really think through what are the bigger impacts that could come, and how might IA funding enable you to make a start with that? Hope that helps.
Really helpful, yeah, thank you very much.
Perfect. Okay, so Jonathan, I think you put a question in the chat which was, is there a UK orientation or can we look to international? No, don't worry, we haven't covered this, and it's a great question, Jonathan. Thank you. Do you want to speak a bit more? I'm happy to answer it as you asked it in the chat.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think your answer to Stephen sort of helped and clarified that a little bit. I suppose the backstory is that I've had some AHRC funds to look at festival events in East Africa as a sort of mechanism for promoting sort of resilience amongst local people and sustainability issues. I'd really like to go back to Madagascar and to work with some tour guides alongside some of their festivals, where they're very much at a fledgling stage, and it's a case of, it's not really research, it's more sort of community engagement. I'm wondering.
No, go on. Finish your.
So sort of GCRF, sort of AHRC sort of remit in terms of topic.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure if it fitted in terms of the international side of things versus national partners.
So I need to double check with Hive. So on the ESRC side, we do have projects that have international partners, and that's absolutely fine. I need to double check specifically whether we have any limitations because it's Hive funding. Assuming that isn't the case, then I think that that sounds like a really interesting project that would fit within the remit. I think the thing I would say to you is, in general, projects that are only about community engagement don't meet impact criteria particularly well. So it's about thinking through what is the impact from your research that community engagement is leading to, and it's fine if the engagement itself is at a relatively early stage of the impact trajectory. It's sort of, you can't get to the impact trajectory unless you've done that engagement with these people. It might not look like much or be very specific initially, but it's a really important foundational step. That's fine, but you need to have, and the board needs to understand, a really clear trajectory of what that then longer impact pathway is and how this particular funding is going to contribute to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Patricia, I'm assuming that if you want to jump into any of these, you'll just jump in.
Yeah, I will, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, Konstantin, can we collaborate with colleagues from other faculties, and how will this be regarded? Is the rule that the PI needs to be in our faculty? So I think we've set a kind of unofficial rule, which we might break if there are really good reasons to break it. We've set an unofficial rule that we're expecting the PI for the Arts and Humanities IAA project funding to be from an Arts and Humanities school within FAS, because I think, this is about levelling up a community that haven't so far had access to this type of funding. So it feels right then to prioritise that kind of structure. There's absolutely nothing to stop you collaborating with colleagues from other faculties or universities. And I think that, multidisciplinary approaches to impact are often much more powerful than single discipline approaches. So, assuming that there's a really good argument for why that multidisciplinary collaboration is essential, for the impact that you want to achieve, absolutely nothing to prevent you doing that. That would seem to make a really strong project. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, and then Lena. Tagging onto that, I have a project that might be a good fit here, which I am working on with a colleague from another university. Would that work? Yes, there's nothing wrong with that in principle. The thing I would say is that we can't funnel funding to projects to colleagues at other universities. So we can't pay for their time for someone who's sitting at another university. The costs are to be used for Surrey researchers rather than to benefit other institutions. But we've had a number of ESRC IA projects which have collaborators, academic collaborators from other universities, and it's a really important part to have them be part of these impact activities. So that in and of itself is absolutely fine. Does that help, Lena? Okay, I can see a hand, but I can't see John. John, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Oh, I've got the camera on now, good.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask this question, which is to do with the difference or distinction, if there is, between making impact and demonstrating impact. It sounds a bit pedantic, but it just from the so I got some Heath funding last year, And a good way of demonstrating this, I suppose, is a key output was a very short 1 minute piece, 1 minute film, using virtual production, etc., etc. But also another output, which was probably more interesting from I don't know, from a research point of view, was a 5 minute, what we call a BTS, a behind the scenes. And in a sense, the behind the scenes demonstrated the impact, and the film itself demonstrated the technique, the research, and technology and the creative and all that sort of stuff. And ironically, of course, the behind the scenes is just like a documentary type interview, so it's cheap. You know, the actual production itself is, although we did it on the cheap, it's classically a lot more expensive than 15K would buy. So I'm just wondering if we can, I think you said that you can adjunct this type of funding to a bigger project to demonstrate its impact. But I think I've just sort of got a few questions about that, because I mean, first of all, presumably the Heath Fund in its entirety is still there, but this is just a bit of it.
Yeah, that's
good.
Correct.
All right. So these little pots of money are really to do something which can which could potentially be the metaphorical behind the scenes that demonstrates impact, or am I being stupid?
No, well, you're definitely not being stupid. I think I see it slightly differently. So I think I would see this as being the piece before the demonstrating. So you've perhaps done some research, you've got a research finding that you think could have impact potential. Before you get to the bit where you're proving the impact potential that it's had, there's a piece in the middle that often needs funding. And whether it needs funding because you need support to be able to do it, so research assistant support, or it needs funding because the funding is what helps you pull together collaborators to work with you on this, you know, or you need funding because there is a specific series of actions that you want to carry out, or activities that you want to carry out that need to be funded. What the IAA is designed to do is to focus on that piece. Now, you're absolutely right, there is also the demonstrating impact piece, and I think that that's something that becomes, you know, increasingly important as we move further into the REF cycle, and people are starting to think about evidencing REF impact case studies in particular. With the ESRC IA, we do a certain amount of reporting to ESRC about the impact of the activity that we funded. So we do a kind of more a slightly smaller scope collection of evidence about what's happened, and I think that is a really important part of having generated impact, is that you're able then to capture what the impact of the activity was. By and large, we tend not to fund that piece, so there might be a certain amount of gathering impact included within the IA project, but the focus is on doing the impact activity. I think we will see the university putting money towards evidence collection and the demonstrating evidence, you know, demonstrating impact piece further into the REF cycle, but it's not a particularly key part of what we're doing here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we find ourselves, or me and my little team find ourselves doing a lot of demonstrator filmmaking for other people in the university, which is great fun, because we get to know what they're doing and we can sort of make ourselves and our equipment useful. But what from what you're saying, that's not really accelerating impact. That's the impact's already been accelerated and has got up to speed, and we're just coming in afterwards and proving it's happened, sort of thing.
And I think the question would be whose research is having the impact. So, for example, if you were coming in and doing these kind of demonstrator films that were for somebody else's impact, then that's, you know, obviously a good activity to be undertaking, but it might not fit the remit for this specifically. One thing I would say is that we did fund the making of a documentary from the ESRC IA, where it was specifically about Walter Keating's project in politics. He had done a lot of work with Hong Kong loyalist protester communities, and this was, you know, the documentary was a tool to raise awareness about that movement and the history behind it and what happened to them, you know, after the protests. So there's nothing to stop you making films with the money. But it's thinking about impact from your research that is the key. The other thing I would add there is, you're absolutely right that, you know, 15k isn't a lot to produce a film with. One of the things that is a real point of opportunity we found with IAA funding is it often helps you engage additional contribution from the people that you're working with. So sometimes, as Melissa mentioned, that might be that people reduce their rates to be able to work with you, so that you're still paying them, but you're paying them at perhaps half of what they might generally charge. Sometimes people are able to find, you know, a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand that they can also add to the project, because there's money already on the table. And I think when we started, we were very cautious about expecting that for the social sciences, because it's not generally the type of, you know, you don't expect to see large amount of financial leverage happening there, but actually I think we've seen more than we expected, and so I'm optimistic that the same might be true for the arts and humanities. So, you know, if you want to do something that is larger than the scope of the award, that's another opportunity, is that you look for, you know, are there external partners who could contribute additional amounts of funding.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, and then I think we've got Jude in the chat who asked, can I draw on research before my time in Surrey? So the answer, Jude, there is, for REF impact, it has to be research that you've produced at Surrey. So, you know, the IAA is about impact beyond REF. We're not narrowing the support specifically to only those things that are going to be REF impact case studies, but the focus of this is around generating impact from Surrey research. So if you're someone who's only recently joined Surrey and you're working on research at the moment that will be submittable to the next REF, you might be looking for funding that is looking at early stage impact, or, you know, the research is in an early stage and you're looking for kind of more exploratory work. Obviously, you know, REF creates these slightly arbitrary divisions that don't really match academic lived experience. So I think the shortest version of an answer to that question is, if you're interested and you think you have something that might be applicable, come and talk to me about it, and we can have a talk through what you think, you know, you want to do and whether that would fit the eligibility criteria. It might be that you need to perhaps think forward in terms of how this really links you into Surrey research and Surrey impact. Does that help? Okay, I'm going to assume that silence means yes. We had a question about recording. We're going to put the recording for this on the IA's YouTube site, so people will be able to watch it, hopefully deleting off the kerfuffle at the beginning where we couldn't find the right slides. Okay, so I think we feel like Diane, I can do the easiest thing, Diane, I think probably at the moment is just to ping me an email and I can find time to chat. It's fairly busy. So drop in at times where I'm sitting doing nothing. Doesn't generally happen, but if anybody would like to chat, ping me an email and I can find time to arrange it. Okay, so this is a last chance for anybody that might want to either comment or ask a question. Rachel and Patricia, if you would like to come in on anything, or Bran, you're still here.
Yes, I've been here all along, absolutely listening with interest.
Oh, I was expecting you to be very busy and have to rush away into some other meeting, so that's brilliant. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
I don't know. I think lots of interesting initiatives. I mean, the Being Human Festival, I always think is something that is important for us to be involved in. This isn't necessarily related to the Impact Accelerator account, but I think there are mechanisms which have a high level of visibility and do facilitate impact. And certainly some of the examples that the best examples of impact I've experienced were part of the Being Human Festival. Yeah. In this kind of area, where it really showed the potential to get public involvement and stakeholder involvement.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'd second that, Tamsin, because yeah, I mean, I think we discussed something in the Sex, Gender and Sexualities Centre that might lend itself to that, and that might be something we can chat about at some point.
I mean, because what's the FOSS? I'm kind of interested because FOSS in FAS, is it, you know, because I know there's an event today, isn't there? There's the new launch of the Centre for Power and Governance that involved quite a few schools and faculty. So that's Festival of Social Sciences, isn't it? So is that the same kind of thing? Is that an external, is that a UK-wide thing that we're part of? Yeah.
So ESRC have a yearly and annual festival of social science, and the ESRC IAA cohort are encouraged, or it's a mandatory part of our funding that we have to set aside, ring fence a particular amount of our funding to support activity in the Festival of Social Science. And I mean, you know, it has had a really significant impact here at Surrey. So before we got the ESRC IA, we had maybe one person a year, you know, perhaps not even that, who would participate from Surrey in that FOSS activity. And this year I think we've got 10 events. Last year we had 21 events. You know, it's really seen a significant shift in terms of the activity. And I think, as I was mentioning before, what has been really interesting, and we want to do a bit of kind of data gathering to be able to evidence this, but anecdotally what we're seeing is some really, you know, significant impacts from a relatively small amount of public engagement activity in terms of both future impact activity and future research activity. So, you know, it's really making the point that public engagement is such a powerful part of this whole process.
So putting your research on the map, isn't it, publicly? And fora like that allow you to do that sort of nationally and internationally, people tap in.
This is it. And I think, you know, one of the really transformative things about it is, you know, we had 2 years where we had to deliver all of those events online. And actually that was eye-opening, because we get people, you know, and we're still this year in the events that are online, you know, we have people sign up internationally, you know, from across the globe, and you think, how have they found out about this, you know? But the scope for people coming across your research then, I think, is, you know, immeasurably wider. And the other thing I would say is, you know, the best public engagement opens up the possibility for you to be influenced by the people that you're sharing your research with. So it's not just a one-way process, but, you know, you share with them and then you get input back, and it's that getting input back that can be the thing that is really transformative.
I think, Tamsin, the other thing that's really struck me that's productive about this kind of discussion is in separating the arts and humanities out, which I think is really worthwhile, as I said at the start. But in doing that, it almost encourages us to define the arts and humanities in terms of research and what's distinctive about this. And that really comes to the fore in impact and public engagement, because you're actually, what is it that our kind of research can do for society? What kind of change can it affect? So I think with humanities, there's obviously that human element, but it's human that in a way it doesn't purely relate to society. It's a way that relates perhaps to culture and perhaps to meaning and perhaps to something more philosophical and individual. Art is perhaps harder with arts in a sense. We know what the arts are, but what do the arts do? In relation, in relation to humanities. I mean, that's why there's a link. What do the arts do? So I think it's probably helpful in the long run if we keep those kind of questions in mind when we think about our impact activity.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think one of the, you know, latterly, so the last year or so in the ESRC IA, we've been having some really interesting discussions, both as the board and also with applicants, about how do you capture evidence of intangible impacts. You know, I think we started off with a fairly operational, pragmatic viewpoint where we were thinking very much in terms of, you know, what are the numbers that you can count? But actually, as we've got more confident in that, and, you know, we've started to have perhaps slightly more evolved but more interesting conversations about, you know, what other impacts might there be that are happening, you know, how can you capture them if they're intangible and it's not about numbers? You know, there are, you know, new medias are ways in which you can start to capture, you know, senses of comments and so on, and do analysis around that. I think we're sort of on the cusp of some really interesting tools that we can use to do that. And I think that's a really important part of the arts and humanities impact as well. Rachel?
Yeah, I just want to come in on that point because I think that's a really important one, actually. And just a plug for the FAST Festival of Research in January, that we're planning to run a session on evaluating impact, and Catherine McNamara, head of the GSA, has agreed to speak at that. So I think that will be a really good place to actually open up some of these discussions. I just wanted to say that. And the other thing is, I mean, it's been really great today to hear the enthusiasm that people seem to have for this, and lots of kind of, you know, embryonic ideas. I would encourage people to get in contact with us sooner rather than later, because we do have quite a lot of money to spend this year, and we do need to get on with spending it. So yeah, if you have an idea, please don't leave it too late to get in touch with us, because we do want to make sure that we, you know, use the money that the university's given us effectively this year. Thank you, and thank you very much for everybody for contributing. It's been a great event. Thank you, Tamsin.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Rachel and Patricia and Bran and Melissa for your contributions. If there are no other formal questions, I'm doing a pregnant pause to see whether anybody wants to leap in. And okay, then thank you very much everybody for your time and for the discussion, which was really fascinating. We'll share the recording and I look forward to hearing from you.
Sorry, Tamsin, can I have
Yes.
a quick question?
Yes.
When is the deadline then for the spend for this sort of year round, in terms of if you wanted to do an activity next summer, would that be too late? Or
no, so if you wanted to do an activity next summer, you would be looking to apply well, depending where in the summer. So the deadline, the university's financial year runs 1st of August to the 31st of July. So depending on how you're counting summer, you might want to apply sort of at the beginning of next year, say, and say, right, we want to do 2 months of spend in this financial year and 4 months or 6 months of spend in the next financial year. But you just, unlike with the ESRC IA, we just need to be really mindful of that, you know, division. And as Rachel says, you know, the end by the end of July. So we've got an allocation that is for this financial year. So, you know, that's a unsubtle encouragement that people should apply for money because we have to spend it.
okay, thank
Does
you.
that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect. Anybody else while we're finishing up? No? Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Tamsin. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Emma.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bram.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.